How can a chief minister or a prime minister or a chief minister make sure that the teacher is attending the school, right? That has to be a local government function. It's not about, again, what is the right amount of decentralization fiscal. The point is, which function should. So from a citizen's perspective, it often makes sense for health and education and service delivery to be local, because that's how you get the accountability.
The last theme I want to touch upon is centralization and decentralization. Right? One of the big points that you make in the book is insight is that we are extremely centralized as an administration, as governance. If you compare with China often is seen to be that strong state which must be centralized, but it's actually significantly decentralized when it comes to governance. Can you just share this and the statistics around this? And
Yeah, exactly, right? So for most people, this is like one of the most counterintuitive kind of facts in the book, right? Which is, if you look at measure of decentralized, so even let's take a step back, okay? Let's think about what is the right level of centralization, decentralization before you look at the facts and how to interpret that, okay? And before that, I'll take an even further step back. Sorry, I'm a professor, I have to do this conceptually, right? Which is, what is the impact of country size, okay, and governance, right? So as a citizen, would you prefer to live in a big country or a small country, okay? And the answer is not clear, right? So if you look at 9 of the 10 richest countries in the world are smaller, like, Singapore, Dubai, whatever, right? And so why would you want to be in a big country? Okay. So the main advantage historically of being big is that you get economies of scale in the provision of public goods like defense. Okay. So important relation in defense, their size matters. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but when it comes to, so size gives you many advantages. It gives you advantage in defense. It gives you advantage in market size. It gives you advantage in terms of insurance. Okay. But size also comes with two fundamental costs for governance. Right? The two fundamental costs is that you have to, the bigger you grow, the more variation you have to accommodate, okay, in your policy choices, right? So if you look at kind of our language debates right now, okay, like that is the core, right? So that when you want to impose a policy that is kind of in the middle, the people who are not there, the bigger you are, the more difference there is, and people want their diversity, right? So historically, that's kind of why secessionist movements have always happened kind of in the periphery of kind of the core, because when the core tries to impose something, the periphery says, I don't want to be part of you. Okay. So, which is the fundamental cost of size, because the bigger you get, the more diversity you have to accommodate. Okay. So, that's problem number one. Problem number two is it also hurts governance because of the distance between the citizens and the government. So, when you put more distance, government becomes less responsive, less agile. Okay. So, which is why if you look at kind of many of the richest countries in the world are small. Okay. Now,
so it's better to be in a large country which is appropriately decentralized, right?
but this is where I'm going with this, right? So where I'm going with this is to say that how do you get the benefits of both size and kind of the benefits of being small, right? And that is why the institution of federalism, right? Is this kind of device that is trying to get you the best of both worlds, right? So when done well, the logic of federalism is that the functions that benefit from scale should be sitting in the central government. The functions that need to accommodate diversity should sit, say, at a state level. And the functions that need to respond to local information, is the teacher absent or not, should sit with the local government, right? How can a chief minister or a prime minister or a chief minister make sure that the teacher is attending the school, right? That has to be a local government function. Okay. So the logic, therefore, which is why one of the most important points in the federalism chapter is most of us tend to think about federalism as a hierarchy. Okay, think center is more important than state and more important than local. That's not right. From the citizen's perspective, the differentiation is not by hierarchy. The differentiation is by function. Okay, there are some functions that local government can do better. There are some functions that state government can do better, and some functions that central government can do better. Okay, so by that logic, from the citizen's perspective, it is actually optimal for, it's not about, again, what is the right amount of decentralization fiscal. The point is, which function should. So from a citizen's perspective, it often makes sense for health and education and service delivery to be local, because that's how you get the accountability, right? So where India ends up being incredibly over-centralized, okay? So if you look at decentralization, by what fraction of total budgets are spent in the control, not spent locally, but controlled by local government. In India, so just for perspective, in China, that number is over 50%. So over 50% of
the local government,
public third tier China happens in the local government. In the US, that's about 25%. In India, that is 3%. Okay. In fact, that number is over. Now that number has gone up to 5%. But it turns out that it's all driven by Maharashtra, because Maharashtra is actually the most decentralized fiscally. It's about 20-25%. You take Maharashtra out, we're still at 3%. Okay. So which means that we are incredibly over-centralized. But also, we often think over-centralization is mainly between center and state. But in fact, it's state to local. I mean, well, most of that over-centralization happens.
And then let's discuss both of this, center and state to local. First, center to state, right? One of the things that you say in the book is, in general, it's a good idea for states to be smaller. That's one of the things that come up in the book. So just to kind of put it out, what's the right number of states for India, you think? And what are the principles on which you decide what's the right side?
That's what I was going to say. See, I think I prefer to talk about principles because the exact number, again, there's no silver bullet, right? But I think the basic principle is the following, okay, which is that the benefits of size are coordination, okay, whereas the cost of size is lack of responsiveness. So as the population of India has grown, like, I mean, so here is just for perspective. India has more people than the entire Western Hemisphere put together, okay? More than North America, Central America, South America. If you took a globe and saying here is half of the world from 180 from the Greenwich Meridian to the date line, India has more people than that entire half of the world, okay? So you don't have a government of the Western Hemisphere, okay, that is trying to basically govern service delivery, right? So and China is the only country of comparable size. And it's like over 10 times more decentralized than India. Okay. And so one of the key cross-cutting challenges for us, right, is that we are way too centralized and that hurts governance in every way. And you see this, right? The problem, again, even like politically committed chief ministers, for example, are not able to take on public sector unions because the numbers are too big. But why should the chief minister have to even worry about whether the teacher is showing up to the village? Because if that appointment is controlled in the village, the ultimate stakeholder is the parent. So if you don't show up, I fire you. Okay. So why do we not have that? Now, there are very important reasons for that. Okay. So before we kind of criticize our governments, the reason India is so over-secularized, and it's useful to understand the
historical context, you've talked about.
there are three key reasons, right? There is political, economic, and social reason, right? So the political reason is at the time of independence, the founders were most concerned of holding the country together. Okay, you had just come through partition. You're trying to absorb and integrate over 500 princely states, right? So there is no other federal government, federation, where the central government was made so powerful. Okay, so that was the political. The economic reason was, again, we believed that the key to development was huge kind of state-sponsored industrial projects and investments, which only the government of India could mobilize the resources for. But the really interesting question is, is the social reason? And that is why the state is so much more powerful than local. Okay? And the social reason for over-centralizing is because the founders, including Dr. Ambedkar, did not trust local elites that they would allow the marginalized and kind of, historically underprivileged castes to get educated, right? So you were trying to kind of bring modernity of kind of universal democracy on the soil of one of the most unequal societies in the world that had both kind of caste and patriarchy and feudalism, right? So the reason we're over-centralized is the Indian project in some ways is a modernizing state trying to counteract a traditional society.
You talk about that in the book, but at the same time, that was at the time of independence. Just there's nothing to say that we cannot kind of take.
And so that's why, so what I'm saying today is that we have, it served a purpose, but it is dramatically hurting governance quality, right? Dramatically. And now 75 years after independence, education rates have gone from 20% to 80%. The smartphones means that everybody has information and it is much, much harder to have that level of kind of discrimination oppression that you have. So the optimal direction of kind of policy in India
has to be this, right? And I want to talk about specific levers, and you've discussed many levers. So in the center state, there are multiple levers again. We'll come to one by one. But one is also to just reduce the size of the state. Some states are almost kind of ungovernable. So how do you kind of decide that?
No, see, it's a tricky one. Right? It's a tricky one because partly it depends on kind of so one way to say this is in the right time to kind of carve out a separate state is when there is enough kind of local sentiment in an area, okay, that says that, listen, we just are not getting governed well, and therefore we should be our own unit. Okay? So I don't think
we are getting ignored in the larger speech.
Yeah, so I think again it's a mistake to say top down, suddenly say, okay, tomorrow we are going to break up the state. Okay, I think that will be a disaster, right? Because even for a new state to function effectively, it needs a certain social cohesion about what the state stands for, right? So whether it was Uttarakhand or Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand, there were well-established movements that said these areas are distinct. Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand were the much more tribal areas and kind of, for forested areas. And the kind of policies they needed were different, okay? So Telangana again, like kept being, the region is different, and it was historically part of the Nizam's, administration. Whereas kind of coastal Andhra was part of a presidency, right? So there was genuine historical differences. Now Maharashtra, you might argue that Vidarbha is meaningfully different. UP, I think when Mayawati was chief minister, and even in the assembly, they had said there should be four broad areas of like Awadh and Madhya Pradesh and Purvanchal and Bundelkhand, right? And so I think it makes sense, but it has to be driven organically, by kind of domestic kind of saying, okay, we can be governed better. Now, but where there is also very robust evidence is being not just in terms of number of states, right? But there's evidence that even like one of the underappreciated reforms in India was what N.T. Ramarao did in Andhra Pradesh. Okay, so and very few people are aware of this, right? But Andhra and Telangana are the only places where you don't have blocks, but you have mandals. Okay, so in a typical district in India is about 2.5 to 3 million people in UP Bihar with about 10 blocks and about 2.5 lakhs people per block. So, but Andhra, they went to mandals where each block roughly became about 4 mandals. So the block became about 60 to 75,000 as opposed to 2.5 lakhs. And now we have a lot of evidence showing how that brought government closer to people and actually improved governance and service delivery. You can look at border villages that kind of dramatically became closer to to block headquarters and how development outcomes improved there because you've reduced the distance, from the administrative center. And then there's another beautiful
The district's mandal block.
Well, no, the block district. So effectively, mandals are the same as blocks, right?
Mandal is
They-
but within every mandal,
But you have districts. You created many more blocks by creating mandals. So
Yeah,
that's what happened. And then there's another beautiful study now in UP, okay, that shows that having your own gram panchayat, right? So if you're the interesting thing is if you're a village with population under 1,000, if you're above 1,000, you get your own GP. If you're under 1,000, you're clubbed with another GP,
yes,
right? And so what the study shows is that villages with population just above 1,000 have much better governance because they have their own GP. So you get like higher level of citizen.
not just about states. The same thing also applies at every level, right? And